The Human Optimization Podcast is proudly brought to you by Vicon Supplements, where quality meets sustainability. Vicon's all-natural supplements are handcrafted and sustainably produced in Canada, bringing you products that nourish both your well-being and our planet. Visit viconsupplements.com today and be a part of a greener, healthier future.
Are you ready to embark on a journey to the best version of you? Join me, Lisa Pitel-Killah, as I dive deep into the world of hair, tissue, mineral analysis, and functional medicine with fellow experts, and guide you on the path of unlocking your full potential. As a multi-time kettlebell sport world champion, I'm on a mission to reach high-performance professionals from around the world to help you minimize tiring symptoms, maximize health, and gain unstoppable energy. This is the Human Optimization Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. I am going to be ecstatic today because I'm talking about one of my favorite things with one of my favorite people. So Kaely Mcdevitt, if you don't know, is a registered and licensed dietitian with a master's degree in nutrition and exercise physiology. Kaely owns a virtual private practice where she and her team support women through hormone and metabolic health issues. She's spent the past decade supporting thousands of clients and mentoring over 100 practitioners on how to effectively leverage lab testing in their practices. As of December 2024, Kaely is the co-owner of Trace Elements Laboratory. And you've heard me talk about this before. Alongside her husband, Kevin, HTMA, hair, tissue, mineral analysis has been an integral part of her work, and she is deeply honored to carry forward the legacy of Trace Elements into this next chapter. Kaely, welcome to the Human Optimization Podcast.
Thank you so much for bringing me on, Lisa.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about our conversation because we both love the same test. We both love minerals. This is our jam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We could be on here all day.
Right? Could be on here all day. All right. So obviously you've got your bio, but tell us a little bit about you. Like, what really made the HTMA stand out to you and become one of those staple lab tests that you fell in love with for your practice?
Yeah. So like you mentioned in my bio, my practice has specialized in women's health and primarily helping women that are struggling to conceive or women that are postpartum that are dealing with a lot of depletion and symptoms. And so throughout the years, we used a ton of different functional lab tools in practice. We were doing Dutch tests and functional stool tests and all kinds of blood work. And of course, all of that is super helpful. But I was looking at, our client data, and my team and I were like, well, how can we explain why some women respond really quickly and beautifully to a protocol and others don't? Or some people see really fast resolution of symptoms and others don't. And it really wasn't until we brought HTMA testing into our practice that we could answer that question. And, once we started to see the impact that working on someone's mineral status had, first and foremost, like right out of the gates, not only did it sometimes prevent a need for bigger, more expensive tools, but it helped set them up for success in a protocol. And it became the only lab that we automatically required because we had to see it. We just had to have that data. So once we could see that in practice, it was just like a light bulb moment for us. And especially when you think about the clients we were working with and how essential energy is for conception and how essential repletion is for postpartum success, it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. Well, and it comes back around because I couldn't agree more. It comes back around to that foundation, right? Making sure you know what's going on at that really base level to support the body, and then be able to bring in the other testing if it's needed or what have you to make some different changes, right?
Yeah. And it felt like a return to simple. Things get really, and there is time and place for things to get fancier and more complicated in the realm of health, but it felt like a return to basics. We're talking about the cells, we're talking about our stress, we're talking about minerals, and man, that was a fresh breath of air for us and for our clients too, that oftentimes have quite a bit of burnout from the things they've been trying for their health. So it's just one of those great like grassroots tools.
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting too, even in the demographic that you're talking about, because I feel like a lot of times women just think, well, this is just how I'm supposed to feel, or I'm just tired because, right? There's all the excuses that kind of come into the mix.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think there's a cultural normalization of just like moms that aren't thriving and they don't feel good. And they're just trying to get to the end of the day where they can switch from coffee to wine and then repeat the next day. And I know anyone that's in your realm and listening to your work is on our side with saying, that's not enough. That's not how I want to live my life. And I know that I'm here to do more than just survive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so tell me a little bit of background with regards. So we're talking about minerals, right? We both love that topic. We love HTMA. Tell me how the whole part happened with regards to, and then we'll get into trace elements, where that all started.
The love for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I mentioned, we brought that in. It just absolutely changed the game in terms of client outcomes. And then it was just a perpetual nerd out on minerals and how we could impact somebody and do so again, quickly and simply in a lot of cases. And we've used trace elements from the start. I consider myself fairly lucky that that's kind of where I started with HTMA. I was looking at the 3 labs that are available for use in the US. We have Trace Elements, Analytical Research, and Doctor's Data, and picked Trace Elements for a number of reasons that I'm sure we'll get into today. And have been, using that for many years in my practice, teaching it to other practitioners inside my practitioner mentorship. And we are located in Texas, so is Trace Elements. And so it was fall of 2023 when my husband and business partner, Kevin, and I were like, hey, let's go tour the lab. Like, we're relatively close by. I'd love to see it. I'd love to learn more. And we also had some questions in the back of our mind of, hey, what is the future of Trace Elements going to look like? Because we knew the previous owners were in their late 70s and we just hadn't heard what was happening. And it had become such an essential tool in practice that I was a little concerned about what might happen if it were to close. So we went and toured it, had a great nerdy afternoon there. And then that kicked off some conversations about like, hey, what are the next steps with Trace Elements? And then that led into one of those like divinely orchestrated organic conversations that unfolded actually over a 13-month period of time that ended in acquiring Trace Elements as of December 24. So we laugh now because we're like, we had no idea life would unfold this way. Like, if you told us that would be the case a couple of years ago, we would have never believed it. But we're super, super happy to be in this position.
That's amazing. Amazing. Well, and I was lucky enough to head down that way in March of last year to tour the lab personally as well, and see even some of the changes that you were updating and things that were happening. So that was amazing too.
It was super
And to meet all the staff that have been there forever, by the way.
Yes.
I came in and I've talked to people so many times via email, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, Lisa."
Yeah.
Like, they're just amazing.
Oh,
Amazing.
incredible. I mean, the tenure from so many of the people on that team is really unheard of in business today. And they have so much history there with the lab itself and with the clients. And it's really a cool thing.
Absolutely. So let's talk about because I have always used trace elements as well, by the way. I mean, I dabbled in ARL, I dabbled in Canol, which is here in Canada. But I really went back to trace elements for a number of reasons. And I'll talk about 2 of them actually. One was the number of elements that were tested.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, 37 different elements, right? The other one was when I got into animal testing, I realized, and I'm making assumptions, but I'll share that I think that the data for animals is there's a lot of differences, right? Between the ranges and the optimal levels and the ratios even. And when I first started doing some testing, I noticed some big differences. And the one thing I noticed that I had identified was that when I was doing my research and kind of testing the animals to see where they fit and then correlated with symptoms, I found that trace elements was the closest to what I thought was a complete representation of that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really where I was, I was like, no, I'm making the right decision here. Right. So that meant a lot to me. But talk about the tech and the processes and some of the things that, I think we all believe of why trace elements is kind of that platinum standard for hair tissue testing.
Yeah. So the gold standard for hair mineral analysis now is called ICP mass spec, or inductively coupled plasma mass spec. And I'll save a boring conversation of what all that entails. But I will say really I can speak to the ones in the US, but any US based HTMA lab is using that technology, which is an important thing too, because that allowed for faster, longer list of elements being analyzed in a much lower detection limit. So we could actually see things that were in very, very trace amounts, and we couldn't with the previous technology. So that was part one of what I was looking for with choosing lab and trace elements. And then the other part is what happens prior to introduction into that machinery. And this is where I think opinions vary widely. We wanted something that wasn't washing a sample with a chemical agent or a detergent. And based on the available literature on washing samples, it impacts endogenous mineral content, not just what's on the hair shaft, quite significantly. Based on the study you're looking at, and based on the mineral, sodium and potassium being the most vulnerable to influence by washing, it can minimize that by up to 90%. I mean, that's
huge.
Huge.
90%. Wow.
Yeah. So ARL and trace elements both do not wash prior to introducing into the machinery, which is a huge difference from other labs that do. And what's cool in the at least US history of HTMA testing is that doctors' data, ARL, and trace elements used to participate in a lot of inter-laboratory studies to try to elevate the field as a whole, which I think was great cooperation amongst the labs. So what they found is that if you had the same pre-test procedure, meaning you either all washed or all didn't wash, you had great agreement between the labs because we were using the same equipment. But if you use a different procedure prior to introducing it to the ICP mass spec, you have very different results, which is expected. But I think that difference is what's used to slander HTMA testing as a whole. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So those would be the main differences in terms of why we chose trace elements, not washing, using ICP mass spec. And then from there, the difference comes down to the number of elements tested, which was a big factor in my decision to go with trace elements as well. And how is that result being interpreted? And what are those reference intervals based off of? And one thing that I will say until I'm blue in the face about Dr. Watts is that he will validate anything that he is putting out there. Like there is always copious amount of literature behind any claim that he's making. And if he is establishing a reference interval, he is doing so using a scientific method. And that's not something that you can say for every laboratory in the game. And it's likely why you're seeing such an agreement between particularly the animal data and symptoms, is because those reference intervals are based on healthy animals and a Gaussian distribution established reference interval. And that's not something that's guaranteed with other tests.
Right. But so important.
Right.
I think that would be one thing. I mean, even as an end user consumer, not even a practitioner or a physician, that we would almost expect.
Right.
Yep. Wow. Well, and let's talk about Dr. Watts' pioneering work, because I think that is there's such a big story there, right? And I always, when I share that sometimes, because people be like, well, how long has it been around? It's just like, oh my gosh, it's been around even longer than when they discovered the significant ratios.
Yes.
Like decades before that, they were doing hair testing.
Decades. Yeah, I mean, it literally goes back decades. This is a lifetime body of work from him. And it goes back to a lab called, I think it was Mineral Labs in California originally. And this was like 50 to 60 years ago. And Dr. Watts and Dr. Eck, who went on to run Analytical Research Laboratory, were using Mineral Labs tests and trying to figure out the language that was being spoken in hair mineral tests. So they did I'm always in awe about this, but just like awe-inspiring work and tedious work to tease out, what does it mean when I see this in the hair? What does it mean relative to what I see in the blood and what I might see in the urine? And what would be the expected reason for shifts in a mineral pattern based on the neuroendocrine system? And they mapped out this web that we use today to speak the language of minerals in the hair. And they did it old school. I mean, Dr. Watts talks about sitting in a library and just like combing through texts and research and figuring out, hey, okay, if the parathyroid gland is upregulated, here's what I can expect that to do in the hair. And if that happens, what other things are impacted by it? And they just built this algorithm for understanding hair tissue mineral analysis. So that, goes back 50 to 60 years. They partner together on Analytical Research Lab for a good chunk of time, maybe a decade, if I'm remembering correctly, before parting ways and kind of doing their own thing. And so Trace Elements was founded in 1984. So we are 42 years into running this particular lab. So there's a lot of history with HTMA. And I think it's gaining more traction recently. And a lot of people have this assumption that it's new, but this is an old, very supported testing methodology. And something I like to cite often is that the EPA uses HTMA to look at toxic metal exposure if they need to test a site. And they have since the 60s. So it's just a long established test.
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting too, because I find that you mentioned people thinking it's new. And you have so many people reaching out going, oh my gosh, you do hair testing? How long ago did that happen? And you're like, oh, well, I don't have time to give you all the history, but I find that a lot of people are finding that based on the fact that they don't feel like themselves, right? Because that foundation is weak, their resiliency is low, their immune system might be compromised, right? We talk about sodium, potassium, how important those are for energy production so the body can actually function well. And I find a lot of people nowadays, especially in kind of this hustle bustle society we now live in, right, that those are more and more showing up depleted.
Absolutely. And then you pair with that, it's harder and harder to get enough minerals from the food supply because the soil is more and more stripped. And then we have more and more things competing for that by way of pharmaceuticals, chemicals, all of that. So it is hard to be, or it takes intention to be a really vibrant human being. So it makes sense to me that HTMA is on its upward trend of adoption, because this is the route to getting that vibrancy back and that we've lost over the decades.
Absolutely. Well, and I do find too, it's, I want to say a little bit underrated, right? And so let's go back, because you mentioned something earlier. We talked about discrepancies, right? And some of the, I guess kind of, negative thoughts regarding HTMA, people writing it off saying, well, that's hocus pocus, or that's completely irrelevant. It's unproven. And, blood's the only way to go. And I mean, we all use blood labs.
Right.
For me, blood labs and HTMA, it's the full circle.
Yes. Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's really not about replacing anything. It's supporting and running in tandem to other things. And we're a big fan of that too. Every client gets blood work in HTMA, because then we start to see a big picture for them. So I do think that's where things get astray with HTMA, is trying to argue that it replaces something like blood work or replaces something else. And it's just a different tool. It's looking at different things and works beautifully together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think part of the other important thing too, that Dr. Watts, I will loosely say, you can confirm, was probably one of the first ones to identify and the loss patterns.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
I feel like, so for those people listening that are like, ooh, I need a hair test, right? Like, what does that mean? What does my hair tell about me? Some of the things that I say, one is, do you go to the health food store? Usually the answer is yes, right? Well, what do you do when you go to the health food store? You stand in front of or you find a store clerk and say, here's how I'm feeling. And they don't know you. They don't know your history. And then they lead you down the aisle and go, I think you need this. Whereas HTMA actually shows us what is happening in the body so that you know exactly what is needed to fuel that body, right? And so for me, it's a no-brainer, just as a blueprint ongoing, to be able to have longevity, right? Not age quickly, right? Because we know the toxins cause us to age faster. And I think going down that road and having people understand that the loss patterns are important, because HTMA isn't like blood work from an interpretation perspective.
Exactly.
Right. And I think that that's a really big important point. And I think Dr. Watts' work on that really made that clear for a lot of us to be able to put effective protocols together. Because I also hear of people who have done HTMA and the practitioner maybe didn't interpret that the right or the way that it is. And then they haven't had the results that they were expecting or hoping for.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. I mean, the magic is in the interpretation. Just the raw data alone isn't going to have a life-changing impact. And if it's not being read with the required nuance, it can actually maybe be detrimental depending on how that's interpreted. And yeah, I agree with you. It was his work that established that a high result on an HTMA doesn't automatically equate to a accumulation or an excess. And I find in working with practitioners and clients alike, we're so trained to looking at blood work that we're like, oh, high value means there must be a high amount, but it's different when we zoom out and think about what we're looking at and the time frame of what we're looking at. And that's, arguably the biggest difference between an HTMA and blood work is the time frame. We're getting about 90 days or 3 months of information, whereas that blood work is that moment in time. Here's what was in transit around the body. Again, still useful, just different pieces of information. And when we're looking at the hair, which in all intents and purposes is a tissue biopsy, we're looking at the follicle that was exposed to blood, lymph, everything that was going on in the body, and then creates a bit of a fossil as that keratin complex hardens as it leaves the scalp. And we have a blueprint of that biochemical material from the previous 3 months. So I think you hit the nail on the head too with HTMA. This isn't a tool where we run a test and we look for a specific result and we're like, we've done it, box checked, we never have to do this again. We're looking at feedback. It's just a report card on how things have been going and whether or not what you're currently doing in terms of life, food, and supplements is a fit for you in this season. And that's something that does change. And it gives you so much power to understand yourself in that way, to make empowered choices to change those things. So I'm going to have to pocket that health food store analogy because I think that's great.
I love that. When I say that all the time, I'm like, why would you go to a store where you don't know the person and just take something off the shelf when you have really no idea if that's what you actually need? Right. Yeah. Well, and I'll give you a little analysis too about that blueprint, just to kind of expand on what we're talking about, because I'll tell you, I stepped away from coaching kettlebells just for a while as business got busy. And, one of the things that I love is that HTMAs for athletes, next level, right? I wouldn't have been able to do what I did without mineral balancing, right? I was almost 4 years into mineral balancing when I won the world championship in the open age group, and I was 45. Right. So it's just so, and I totally attribute that to what I got from my hair and what it was telling me what I needed to be able to fuel my body to get through that session, right? That competition. And I find too, it's so unique to be able to say, again, here's what you need right now. And I have athletes, they'll test once a year or every 6 months, right? They'll test the 3 months before they're going to have a big competition they're prepping for. They'll test in the off season to see what they need to replenish as they recover to get ready for the next season. It's such an important tool to be able to identify that. And I find it super interesting to know that they know when they don't feel well. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's almost like, the wellness scale, we start up at 100 and, as we get older, we get stressed, it starts to drop. And then we think that this is normal. I'm showing about 50% here for those that aren't watching. And all of a sudden that gets lower and lower and lower. We don't even know what 100% feels like anymore. And then all of a sudden when we do mineral replenishment, I feel like people get closer back to that level. And then when it falters, they're like, wait a minute, something's wrong, right? You get an email. You need to send me an HTMA test. My last set didn't go well. Something's wrong.
Yep. Right. I love that. That's really cool.
And you're like, this is amazing.
It's so cool. Yeah. There's a level of body literacy that's attained from actually feeling what it feels like to feel good in your body. And it's a sad reality that we spend so much time not feeling that way that, you lose the sensitivity to it, but we definitely see that too. And I think it's obviously the repletion and allowing your body and cells to work the way they were designed, but it's also a recalibration of our stress response and our relationship to stress. And I think so much of us are existing in that fight or flight mode always. And, that was totally me, just addicted to cortisol. And that's how I felt good, is if I did things that kept me in that state. And once you feel what it's like to come out of that, when you start to veer off course again. So again, it's just, I find it such an empowering tool for the individual.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. And so I know that obviously with the takeover of the lab, right, acquisition, it's been just over a year. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. Wild.
I know.
Can't believe it. What's next? What's coming? Tell me.
Oh, I'm so excited to get to talk about this. So let me briefly tell you what's been happening for the last year, because it hasn't been external things. I would consider them on a list of like more boring things, but necessary. We've just been updating the infrastructure at the lab to handle an increase in volume and to help modernize the experience. So nothing's changing in terms of the process, procedures, and technology, but we expanded the clean room to fit an additional machine that we already got up and running. There's room for another one after that because we anticipate needing it. So for practitioners, that should be faster turnaround times, greater lab capacity. And then most recently, and this was a big project for Kevin, but installed UPS systems. So uninterruptible power sources. So that's preventing loss of power from wrecking these machines because they're very temperamental and there's interruptions in power. So that was a big thing too, just really preventing lab downtime, because HTMA is a really quick test to run as long as there's not an interruption in power. So that feels good. We just needed to really batten down the hatches to be prepared to take it really into its next chapter. So this year is all about the more external stuff. So on our list is modernizing the website and experience for being a practitioner to become a trace elements provider, to build out a portal so that we can share results that way. And a big wish list for mine with that portal is better visual display of previous tests with new tests, so we can see historical lab data.
Love that.
I'd say modernization, getting some social media presence going. There hasn't been a drop of marketing done for trace elements in over 15 years, which I think is really amazing with the growth that's been seen through word of mouth only. But we're excited to get to start putting new educational content out there, making this easier for practitioners to leverage this effectively and just kind of rejoin the modern times a bit.
Love it. I love it. Well, that's great changes. And you know what? Those are so much work.
They are.
Yeah.
Oh,
those are big
I forgot
projects.
a big one on the list that I think we'll be excited about. We're working on the process for increasing the analytes. So adding a couple of things to the test too. So we're really excited about that. It's a process though, to do that, do it correctly. So yeah, I think a lot of exciting things to come. And then there's a lot of research we want to get into. So off to the races a bit.
Well, and you know what? Research is such a fun part. That's the fun part.
Yeah.
When you can discover new things and understand different things and how it can affect individuals. That's always such a fun endeavor.
Yeah, agreed. And I think just creating opportunities for discourse amongst providers that use this tool, and sharing what we're seeing in practice, and sharing the research that's being conducted in a lot of different fields, and really open sourcing that kind of data sharing just to elevate the profession as a whole and help people, because there's so much valuable information. And I just think it hasn't gotten fully out there in terms of HTMA.
I agree. Well, and there's always, I don't want to say negative press, but you understand what I mean, right?
Yep.
And I one of the latest ones, I feel like it was a while back. You may or may not have seen it, but I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about the fact that you can't measure mineral levels in hair because hair is a dead source.
Yeah, I actually do remember that.
Right. And I kind of thought back and I went, I just gave my head a shake and went, what? So, I mean, with decades and decades behind and tens of thousands of practitioners all over the world, and I mean, sharing my own personal journey for those that follow me, it's, I did all the diagnostic tests. I spent more than a decade in estrogen dominance with chronic fatigue, still just trying to be in that mental sympathetic fight or flight all the time to keep my body going. And I was crashing, right? And then to run one last test that literally changed my life, right? And that's when I went, this is a test I should have done first, right? And I feel like, I talk to practitioners multiple times a day from all over the world, and I feel like that aha moment, a lot of us cross that path pretty quickly and we just never look back.
Yep. I know I got goosebumps. Similar, I could say almost the exact same story for myself too. And I think at the end of the day, when you're doing something that's making waves, there will always be naysayers. And, I think
100%.
honestly, we're all allowed to have our own opinions and share them widely on the internet. True. That's great. But I think the results speak for themselves, both individually and within the practitioner's practices. And at the end of the day, that's where it's at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, well, that was great. Great information. And so for those of you, that are practitioners, obviously this is super exciting, because if you're following me, chances are you already use trace elements. Let's be honest. If you're an end consumer though, thinking about HTMA testing, there's lots of resources out there. There's lots of reading you can do. We can hit up traceelements.com, do some reading there. There's all kinds of mineral newsletters.
So good.
There's articles. I've got lots on my website as well, very similar, right? So there's lots of ways to be able to learn and continue to, dive into this wonder of how do we build that strong foundation to be stress resilient and have the longevity and the energy that we really deserve.
Yeah, beautifully said. And what an exciting thing, if you are new to it as a practitioner, an amazing tool that will actually make your work easier. And if you're an end user, what an amazing tool to maybe connect some dots that haven't been connecting and simplify things.
Yeah. Well, and to add to that before we sign off, one of the biggest things, I don't necessarily practice with clients anymore, but one of the biggest things that I noticed was the clients that were finding me, it was like the last resort, right? It's like, I've done all the tests and everything comes back within range, but I still don't feel like myself. I feel terrible. I don't have energy. I'm constipated, whatever it is. And it was just like, it was always such an emotional journey with a client, because, you kind of felt like you wanted this to work so badly, right? But at the end of the day, it did. So there was no question, right? I had one client, and I'll share this too. I had one client, she came in, she had a lot of issues with regards to her GI. So a lot of yeast issues. She was very thin. Her hair was very thin. She was depressed, and, tested her, found all the nuances of what was kind of digging into the root cause of some of those things. And about 8 months later, because she'd done 3 tests, and she came into the office because her husband and her were clients, and she came into the office because she liked to have my assistant take her hair sample. She didn't want to have her husband do it. So she come into the office, and when she walked in, my assistant looked at her, and I unfortunately was on a call, so I couldn't see her in person, but my assistant did. And she came to me after, and she's like, Lisa, she looks like a different person. She has a full head of hair and she was just like, I didn't even know it was her. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sad. I missed her, right? Like, I want to see that. But I mean, these are some of the transformations that I've seen in clinical practice, which are just hands down, this is the reason why you and I love this topic and this test.
Yes, agreed. And same thing here with being the kind of last stop on a very long journey. And I'd say a commonality too is individuals that had done a lot of previous testing and protocols and sometimes felt way worse on those protocols. And it's not for lack of effort. And so again, if that's you listening and you haven't explored this, what an exciting avenue that can solve some mysteries there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Kaely, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a blast to get to chat with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for those of you watching, in the description, we're going to have Kaely's Instagram. We're also going to lead you, of course, to traceelements.com, where you can do all of that reading and digging into those articles and newsletters with some great mineral information. So we'll have all those links for you. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Give this episode a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. And for those listening on your favorite podcast host, make sure you give this episode a like. And I will see you next time. Thanks for joining us today on the Human Optimization Podcast. Episode technical production is by Grace Sylvester and guest booking by Stu Tate. Want to learn more? Visit LisaPitel-Killah.com for incredible free resources to supercharge your journey to becoming the best version of you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe to the Human Optimization Podcast and follow me on social media at Lisa Pitel-Killah.